The camera hidden inside the smoke detector had been recording everything for 3 months, and Alma only discovered it when she noticed a tiny red light blinking in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat as she planned her escape. The Miami mansion that had been sold to her as a luxury modeling house was actually a prison, and every moment of her captivity had been documented by predators who understood that fear could be as profitable as flesh when properly monetized and distributed to the right buyers. What had started as a dream come true, a legitimate modeling agency discovered her photos on Instagram and offering a fully paid opportunity in America, had become a nightmare of surveillance and control that made her realize some offers of stardom were just sophisticated recruitment tools for an industry that treated young women like renewable resources. As she stared at that blinking light, understanding that her every move had been watched and recorded, Alma knew that escaping would require more than just getting out of the house. She had to outsmart a network that had been perfecting the art of trapping girls like her for years. 6 months earlier, Alma had been just another 19-year-old in Havana, working at her aunt's beauty salon and dreaming of opportunities that seemed impossible in Cuba's restricted economy. She was beautiful in a way that made photographers stop mid-conversation, with a kind of bone structure that could sell everything from perfume to politics. But beauty was common in Cuba, and without connections or money, it remained just another asset that couldn't be converted into opportunity. The Instagram message had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other. Elite Models International, with a verified blue check mark and hundreds of thousands of followers, had noticed her photos and wanted to discuss representation. The account looked completely legitimate. Professional headshots of models she recognized, behind-the-scenes content from fashion shoots, testimonials from girls who looked exactly like her talking about how the agency had changed their lives. The initial conversations had been conducted with the kind of professionalism that dissolved her natural skepticism. The agency's representative, calling herself Sophia Martinez, spoke knowledgeable about the modeling industry, asked intelligent questions about Alma's goals and experience, and seemed genuinely interested in developing her career rather than just exploiting her looks. The video calls took place from what appeared to be a legitimate modeling agency office, complete with headshots on the walls and industry magazines scattered on desks. Elite Models International offered everything Alma had dreamed of but never dared to hope for: full representation in the American market, with guaranteed bookings that would pay more in a month than she could earn in a year at the salon. All travel expenses covered, including visa processing, flights, and accommodation in a Miami modeling house where she lived with other agency talent while building her portfolio and establishing her career. The visa processing had been handled entirely by the agency, which claimed to have relationships with American immigration attorneys who specialize in artist visas. Alma never had to visit the American embassy or navigate the bureaucratic maze that typically made legal entry impossible for young Cubans. Sophia explained that their legal team had streamlined the process, using their established relationships to expedite applications for promising talent. The documentation that arrived looked completely authentic: travel visas with official seals, contracts with Elite Models International that outlined her rights and responsibilities, even travel insurance that would protect her during her transition to American markets. Everything was designed to eliminate the barriers that typically prevented young women from pursuing international modeling careers. The departure from Cuba had felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. A private car to the airport, first-class tickets that made her feel like the professional model she was about to become, and the excitement of other passengers who assumed she must be someone important to travel so luxuriously. Sophia met her at Miami International Airport with professional courtesy and a luxury sedan that transported her to what she described as the agency's residential facility for new talent. The Miami house was impressive by any standard, a waterfront mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, with the kind of amenities that suggested serious investment in their models' comfort and well-being. Alma's room was beautifully appointed, with a private bathroom and views of Biscayne Bay that made her feel like she was living in a music video. The common areas were filled with other young women from various countries, all beautiful, all excited about their modeling opportunities. But small details had begun troubling Alma from the first day. The house had no visible security system, yet every door required key cards that were controlled by Sophia and her associates. The windows in all the bedrooms had decorative bars that looked elegant but were clearly functional restraints. Internet access was limited to common areas and monitored constantly, making private communication impossible. The other models in the house seemed nervous in ways that went beyond normal anxiety about new careers. They spoke in whispers about schedules and requirements, flinched when Sophia entered rooms, and demonstrated a submissiveness that seemed more like fear than professional deference. When Alma asked about their modeling work, their answers were vague and contradictory, as if they were reciting scripts rather than describing actual experiences. Sophia's explanation for the house's restrictions was convincing and professional. International models require protection from stalkers and unauthorized photographers who might exploit their images. The controlled environment ensured their safety while they adjusted to American culture and built their professional networks. The limited internet access protected them from cyber stalking and image theft that could damage their careers before they'd even begun. The first photo shoot had been scheduled for Alma's third day in Miami, and Sophia had prepared her extensively for what she described as a test session with a prestigious photographer who worked with major fashion magazines. The location was professional, a photography studio in the design district with all the equipment and lighting that suggested legitimate commercial work. But the photographer's requests had been subtly inappropriate from the beginning. Nothing overtly sexual, but poses that emphasized her body in ways that seemed more suggestive than artistic. When she expressed discomfort, Sophia reminded her that American fashion photography was more liberal than Cuban standards, that successful models needed to adapt to international expectations if they wanted to work with top-tier clients. The session had been recorded extensively, with multiple cameras capturing angles that Alma hadn't been aware of during the shoot. When she asked about the footage, Sophia explained that all their sessions were documented for legal protection and portfolio development. The recordings would be edited into promotional materials that would help establish her reputation in American markets. Returning to the house after the shoot, Alma had noticed changes in how Sophia and her associates treated her. More attention to her schedule, more restrictions on her movements, more emphasis on the opportunities that would be available if she continued to cooperate with their development program. The house that had felt like luxury accommodation was beginning to feel like beautiful imprisonment. The breaking point came when Alma discovered her passport, and visa documents were missing from her room. Sophia claimed they'd been moved to the office safe for security purposes, but refused to let Alma see them or provide copies for her records. When she insisted on contacting the Cuban embassy, Sophia reminded her that her visa status was dependent on the agency's sponsorship and that uncooperative models could face immediate deportation. That's when Alma realized she wasn't a model being developed by a legitimate agency, but merchandise being processed by a sophisticated trafficking operation. The Instagram recruitment, the professional visa processing, the luxury accommodations, all of it had been designed to make her feel special and chosen, while actually isolating her from any support systems that might help her escape. The other women in the house weren't models either. She learned through whispered conversations in bathrooms and stairwells where surveillance was presumably limited. They were from dozens of countries, recruited through similar social media campaigns, all believing they'd been chosen for modeling opportunities that would transform their lives. Instead, they'd been systematically separated from their identities, documents, and freedom. Some had been in the house for over a year, their spirits broken by a combination of psychological manipulation and physical control that made escape seem impossible. They described a rotation system where the most compliant women were moved to other locations for advanced opportunities, while those who resisted faced increasingly harsh restrictions and punishments that never left visible marks but destroyed their hope of freedom. The surveillance system was more extensive than Alma had initially realized. Cameras and smoke detectors, listening devices and air vents, tracking software on any electronic devices they were allowed to use. Every conversation was monitored, every movement recorded, every interaction analyzed for signs of resistance or escape planning. The traffickers had turned modern technology into a web that made traditional physical restraints unnecessary. Elena, a Venezuelan woman who'd been in the house for 8 months, became Alma's unlikely ally in planning resistance. She discovered that the surveillance system had blind spots in certain bathroom areas and had been using these spaces to slowly gather intelligence about the house's security measures and the traffickers' operational patterns. Together, they began documenting evidence using Elena's phone, which she'd managed to keep hidden despite multiple searches. They recorded conversations with Sophia, photographed the house's security features, and gathered information about the other women who'd been processed through the facility. Their plan was to collect enough evidence to expose the entire network, not just escape themselves. The hidden camera in Alma's smoke detector had been their accidental discovery, noticed only because she'd been looking up while trying to spot other surveillance devices. The realization that their most private moments had been recorded and presumably distributed added urgency to their escape planning. They weren't just prisoners. They were performers in content they'd never consented to create. Their escape plan required patience and precision. They needed to avoid the surveillance network long enough to get outside help, while gathering evidence that would prevent the traffickers from simply relocating and continuing their operations with new victims. Elena had identified a window of vulnerability during shift changes when security was temporarily reduced. The night they chose for escape, Alma felt the weight of responsibility for the other women who would remain behind. But Elena had convinced her that exposing the network was the only way to save everyone. That individual escape would only lead to increased security and make future rescues impossible. They were documenting evidence not just for their own freedom, but for the dozens of other women who'd been trapped by similar promises. Their escape through a bathroom window during a shift change had been terrifying but successful. The surveillance technology that had made the house a prison also created predictable patterns that could be exploited by someone patient enough to study them. Elena's months of observation had revealed the system's vulnerabilities, allowing them to move unseen during the brief windows when cameras were offline for maintenance. The evidence they'd gathered was more damning than either had expected. Sophia wasn't just running a single trafficking house, but coordinating a network that extended across multiple states and countries. The Instagram recruitment campaigns had targeted hundreds of young women, offering modeling opportunities that were actually trafficking recruitment tools designed to identify and isolate vulnerable targets. Law enforcement's response to their evidence was swift and comprehensive. The Miami house was raided within hours of their escape, leading to the rescue of 12 other women and the arrest of Sophia and her associates. But the investigation revealed that the network was far larger than anyone had initially suspected, with similar operations in Los Angeles, New York, and several other major cities. The trial that followed exposed the sophistication of modern trafficking operations. Elite Models International was revealed as a completely fabricated business, with fake credentials and artificial social media presence designed to appear legitimate to potential victims. The visa processing had been conducted through a corrupt attorney who specialized in creating false documentation for criminal enterprises. Alma's testimony was crucial to convicting the network's leadership, but the psychological cost of reliving her experience was enormous. She described the Instagram recruitment process, the gradual isolation from support systems, the discovery of surveillance equipment, and the realization that her modeling dreams had been weaponized against her by predators who understood exactly how to exploit young women's ambitions. The other survivors' stories revealed the global scope of the operation. Women from Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia had all been recruited through similar social media campaigns, each tailored to exploit specific cultural desires for modeling careers and American opportunities. The traffickers had developed detailed psychological profiles for different demographics, making their recruitment appear personally targeted rather than systematically predatory. The aftermath of exposure was complex for all the survivors. While they'd been rescued from trafficking, their immigration status remained precarious. Some qualified for T visas as trafficking victims. Others faced deportation to countries where they might be vulnerable to retaliation from criminal networks. The legal system that had protected them from traffickers couldn't always protect them from the immigration consequences of how they'd entered the country. Alma remained in the United States through the Trafficking Victim Protection Program, but her modeling dreams had been permanently poisoned by her experience. She couldn't look at fashion photography or social media recruitment without remembering the surveillance and control that had disguised itself as opportunity. The industry that had seemed like her path to freedom had been corrupted into a tool for exploitation. Working with anti-trafficking organizations, Alma began educating other young women about the warning signs of recruitment schemes. Her experience had taught her that traffickers were evolving their methods, using social media and professional-appearing businesses to make their traps seem like legitimate opportunities. The old stereotypes of trafficking, violent kidnapping, and obvious coercion no longer reflected the sophisticated psychological manipulation that characterized modern operations. The Instagram account that had recruited her remained active under different names, continuing to target young women with promises of modeling careers. Social media platforms struggled to keep pace with the traffickers' ability to create new accounts and new personas, making prevention as much about education as enforcement. Each exposed network was quickly replaced by new operations that learned from their predecessors' mistakes. Elena, who'd been Alma's partner in planning their escape, struggled with survivors' guilt about the women who'd been trafficked before they could document evidence. Her 8 months in the house had given her insights into the full scope of the operation, including women who'd been moved to other locations and might never be found. Their successful escape felt incomplete, while other victims remained trapped. The Miami mansion that had been their prison was eventually sold, its waterfront location and luxury amenities making it attractive to legitimate buyers who had no knowledge of its dark history. The traffickers had chosen the location specifically because its upscale appearance made it seem unlikely to house criminal activity. Neighbors had never suspected that the beautiful young women they occasionally saw were prisoners rather than privileged residents. Sophia, the woman who'd recruited and controlled them, received a life sentence for her role in the trafficking network. But she'd been just one node in a larger system that included recruitment coordinators, document forgers, transportation specialists, and financial operators. The trial had exposed the industrial scale of modern trafficking operations, revealing how many people were required to turn young women's dreams into profitable commodities. The surveillance equipment that had documented Alma's captivity became evidence in prosecution, but also revealed the disturbing reality that their exploitation had been commodified and distributed to consumers who paid for access to recordings of their most private moments. The trafficking hadn't just involved physical captivity, but also the creation and distribution of content that violated their privacy and dignity. Years later, Alma worked as an advocate for trafficking survivors, helping other women navigate the complex legal and psychological challenges of recovery. Her experience had taught her that healing required not just escape from traffickers, but rebuilding trust in institutions and relationships that had been weaponized against her. The modeling industry that had been used to trap her remained a trigger, but also a reminder of her strength in surviving and exposing the predators who tried to destroy her. The camera in the smoke detector that had recorded her captivity had been removed as evidence, but Alma sometimes imagined it was still there, watching and documenting her recovery as she rebuilt her life from the wreckage of broken dreams. She learned that some opportunities were too good to be true, that some offers of stardom were really invitations to disappear, and that the most dangerous predators were those who understood exactly how to package exploitation as opportunity. But she'd also learned that survival was possible, that evidence could expose even sophisticated criminal networks, and that young women who seemed powerless could actually bring down operations that had seemed invincible. The Instagram message that had started her nightmare had also begun her journey toward becoming someone who could protect others from similar traps, turning her exploitation into advocacy and her trauma into strength that no trafficker could take away.